Hello, I'm Adin. Let's take a look at the Shadow Priest at max level in the Legion Alpha. Now, the best way I can describe it in terms of PvP is the premise is basically the same as in Warlords, but much better in a couple of ways. Starting with the biggest change, the resource. It's no longer the 3 or 5 Shadow Orbs, it's a bar now, called Insanity. And you might think that this doesn't change much, as I thought when I first saw it, since it does basically the same thing as the orbs. It fills up with some spells and you spend it with other spells. Though what it does differently is, since it's a bar and not a fixed number of orbs, it has much more flexibility. Before you had 2 spells that generated the orbs, Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death, and you spent them again with 2 spells, either to DPS with Devouring Plague or to CC with Psychic Horror. So because it was a fixed number, you were very limited in what you could do with that style of resource, so was Blizzard. They couldn't do much more with it, and for instance add spells that used up 1 or 2 or even 5 orbs. Now you have a situation where there are a lot of spells to build up the resource and only utility spells that spend it. So Psychic Horror and Dispel Magic spend it, so when you are at full Insanity, you stay at full forever if you're in combat, till you decide to burst. And then the Insanity starts gradually decay, but you have 4 spells to keep it from disappearing entirely. So the 4 spells that helped you get to 100% now help you keep from 0%. Though at some point you will reach 0, since the speed of decaying will inevitably get higher than the speed of which you can replenish it. And adding to that, you have a buff that stacks every second while you are in void form, and it increases your haste by 1% per stack. When everything works perfectly, it almost lasts until the next void form. Now generally I got around 35 stacks or more when staying still and doing the rotation, but of course in any kind of PvP combat the stacks will be less. But what matters the most is the way you actually burst. It's much more dynamic and interesting than before. Where before it was just one spell, Devouring Plague, accompanied by filler spells, now it's 4 different spells that DPS in different ways, with again additional filler spells. Also, it takes way longer to get to 100% Insanity than it did to get to 5 orbs, especially if you are using Dispel Magic and Psychic Horror along the way. But when you do get to Void form, the burst is much more potent than it was, to the point of just solo nuking down a target in a matter of seconds, though that will probably change till launch. Now the time between Void forms is much harder to live through. Without a healer it is nearly impossible, and against melee I found it really impossible, since Mind Blast isn't instant and there is no viable way of gaining Insanity without Mind Blast. Of course, if the target isn't below 35% for Touch of Death. And there is no more Banish, or Stealth for that matter, for priests in general, so for surviving there's just Body and Soul for speed and Dispersion for damage mitigation, and one really weak heal. But when balancing comes, this will all change, I hope. For now, without a healer, when playing against at least competent melee players, you just can't do a thing. So in conclusion, the idea of how the spec is supposed to play isn't much different from Warlords or from MoP, but in practice it makes much more sense like this, and while some unique utility spells have been removed from the priest in general, the DPS spells are much more varied and ultimately make a better design for the spec. Next, I will try the Enhancement Shaman as suggested by a viewer. Till then, thanks for watching and see ya.